no one was going to tell me that I belonged. No one was going to tell me that I deserved it. And no one was going to confirm to me that it was real, that I sort of had to take the step in on my own.
Hello, friends, and welcome to the Medicine Stories podcast, where we are remembering what it is to be human upon the earth through interviews with herbalists, story keepers, ancestral listeners, consciousness explorers, earth dreamers, and other wise folk, with the grounding principles that story is medicine, magic is real, and healing is open-ended and endless. I'm Amber Magnolia Hill. This is episode 36, and my guest today is herbalist Rebecca Altman. I'm really excited to share this interview with you, but got to say a few things first, and one of those is that I didn't plan to be on this little month-long hiatus that just happened, and I apologize for the absence of the show. I know many of you tell me that you just, wait for it and love when it comes out, and it's very much my intention to have it out at least every 2 weeks, as I've talked about many times before. But I had an unexpected family emergency to deal with. Actually just got through a really heavy week where my sister and I had to run down to the Bakersfield area to help our severely alcoholic father get out of a problem that he had created. I've talked about him and his addiction many times on the show, and talked about my Bakersfield kin in episode 29 quite a bit. Back in October, he let a handyman who I guess did some work for him. I don't know if they had a previous relationship or if he just knocked on the door one day, but he ended up giving my dad this sob story about how he'd been kicked out by his wife and had nowhere to live, and so my dad let him move in, because my dad's a really kind and empathetic person. A lot of people hear the word alcoholic and immediately associate that with an abusive personality, but he's not like that at all. And so, as you might expect, over time, this situation just got pretty weird. And the man was putting up like padlocks and rooms to keep my dad out of rooms in his own house. So this house, before my dad lived in it, my grandparents lived in it. And before they lived in it, my great-grandmother lived in it. She died when I was 5, and she had the house built in 1950. And so it's always been our family home. It's the ancestral home place that my sister and I grew up going to. And it just felt like desecration, like this stranger came in and he started letting other people crash there, and I think he was quite possibly dealing or doing both drugs. And he was stealing money from our dad. So it was just a bad situation and seemed to be getting worse, and we didn't know what to do about it. We were talking with his 2 friends down there, and they were trying to intervene, and my dad would ask this guy to leave, and then he would go back and say, "No, it's okay, you can stay. I know you have nowhere to go." And so finally, we got some really good advice, which was to go down there and file an elder abuse restraining order for financial abuse, because we had documentation that this guy was taking my dad's card when he was out of it, and my dad had given him the PIN so he could get groceries back at the beginning, and he was just pulling hundreds, ended up being thousands of dollars out, writing himself checks, writing his friends checks. Really weird situation. So the judge granted the order. We spied from our neighbor's backyard as the cops escorted this guy out. And then we went over there and spent some hours with our dad and got all the locks changed and canceled the bank card. And it's just such a weird situation. And so sad going back to this home that was full of love and joy and goodness when we were growing up, and is now just weird energy. And dad is such a mess, and it's so hard to help him. We've tried so many times, and we've given up trying so many times. And, we both didn't want to go down there and take care of something else, another problem that he'd created, but it really needed to be done. And I left Nixie for 2 nights, the first time we've ever been apart for that long, the first nights we've ever been apart in her 2 years and 4 months of life. And it was fine. She was fine and I was fine. So that was nice to know that we're okay now being apart. And so lucky and grateful that I weaned her last month kind of spontaneously. I wouldn't have been able to leave her if she was still nursing, and I definitely didn't want to bring her with me. So then we drove back, and then the next day we had to drive to Reno. So Bakersfield is a 6-hour drive, and then Reno is a 2-hour drive from where I live, to participate in a deposition related to our mom's death in a car accident 3 years ago. So that was heavy, having lawyers ask us questions about what we understand about the accident. And then we basically had to prove how much we loved our mom, which was very easy to do because we loved her very much. And yeah, it was just a heavy week between those two things, And of course, we were both on our periods and just trying to get through it, trying to take care of our people in two very different ways. It's a trip, what happens in people's lives, what time can do. As Joanna Newsom sings in the song Anecdotes, what time can do to people and to families. And I really feel like an adult right now. I adulted hard last week, and it was hard. And now it's over, and it's okay. And I'm very happy to be back talking to you, sharing this interview. I also want to let you know about an event coming up. So episode 26, guest Daniel 4, it was one of the best interviews I've done. I think it's one of the most downloaded. I absolutely loved it. I love Daniel's work. I love his book, Ancestral Medicine, website, ancestralmedicine.org. Back in December, I went to an Ancestral Lineage Healing Intensive here in Nevada City. I was actually working with this line, with my hill line, the pure paternal, fathers, 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 fathers line, going back in time to when things got broken and what went wrong and why these men became such a long, long line of alcoholics. And just working with that, figuring out what happened and trying to bring healing to the unwell dead, and to my father as well, if at all possible, which I don't know if it is. But anyway, it was an extremely powerful, beautiful experience that I had over those 3 days. I could never even put into words what it meant to connect with this ancient, well ancestor of that lineage and to learn from him. And I'm still in communication with him every day and will be hopefully for the rest of my life. I just think that, ancestral healing work is probably the most powerful work that a person can do, and that it is so needed right now at this time on the planet, so needed by every single person. And so there's another one coming up for people who are near the Bay Area, or actually at the one last month, people had flown in from all over the country to be at it. And they're happening all over the country and the world actually this year in 2019. So again, you can check out ancestralhealing.org, ancestralmedicine.org. And, any of Daniel's interviews or books. There's so many ways to bring this work into your life. But for me, being in that room for those 3 days with people working on this was just amazing. So I'm doing it again, which is kind of crazy, but I'm so excited. My husband Owen is going to do it with me in Berkeley on February 8th, 9th, and 10th. The 8th is my birthday. I think I'm going to be working with my mother line this time, my mother's people, and, really connecting with the spirit of my mother. And I'm just so excited. And I wanted to mention that in case anyone is able to come. There's still tickets available. And one of the facilitators is Pavani More. And Pavani has a podcast called Bespoken Bones, which if you follow me on Instagram, you already know how much I love it. And if you love this podcast, you will love that podcast, Bespoken Bones. Check it out. And finally, one last thing is I want to talk about the 2 new medicines we have in our shop, Mythic Medicinals, at mythicmedicine.love. We have a lion's mane elixir, which is a triple extraction, and a hawthorn berry oxymel. These are two of my very favorite medicines, and it was so fun bringing them into being with Owen over the fall. And so the hawthorn berry oxmel, first of all, it tastes so good. That is what brought me into making it, as someone had given me one that they made last year. And I was like, this is the best thing I've ever tasted. I want it all the time. I've got to make one next year. So we did, and an oxymel is apple cider vinegar and honey. So it's hawthorn berries in those two mediums. And then, of course, the berries are strained out. And it's a medicine that's heart nourishing, digestion supporting, and antioxidant rich. And I formulated it really to fortify your tender yet resilient human body and spirit. I really think of hawthorn as it just carries this incredible medicine, as do all of the rose family plants, of this teaching of softness and strength and the intersection of those two. And that like sort of porous boundary between us and the rest of the world. Hawthorn helps me find the sweet spot that I want to be in that boundary space. So I think it helps to keep you soft and vulnerable in that good way, you know, where you're open to experience and you're willing to share yourself with the right people, but also the thorn, right? And keep the boundaries up. Have an intuitive sense of what to let in and what to keep out, who to let in and who to keep out. So I really think of it as just like a deeply nourishing and fortifying medicine in that way. And there's a ton of science around hawthorn berries and flowers' effect on the heart. So that's there too, that real physical medicine. But I really, when I take this and when I formulated it, I'm thinking about like the energetic and emotional medicine that it carries. And then the lion's mane elixir. So lion's mane is a beautiful mushroom. If you've never seen it, like Google image it now. It's so, so beautiful. And we grew the lion's mane at home. So fun, our first time doing that. And then it's triple extracted. So there's 3 different mediums through which we pulled out the mushroom medicine. Mushrooms tend to have a huge spectrum of medicine, lots of different chemical constituents. And so if you kind of want that full spectrum, you need to pull it out using different solvents, because they all pull different things out. So this was made using alcohol, vodka, hot water, and cold water. And so this powerful mushroom supports cerebral and cognitive functioning, helping to optimize focus and memory. As a nerve tonic, it promotes gut health because the gut is rich in nerve endings, as well as benefiting the liver and the immune system. And its adaptogenic effects help to regulate the body's stress response. Again, there's a ton of science out there around lion's mane. I started learning a lot about it when my brother-in-law suffered a traumatic brain injury last summer. And so many of the suggestions are lion's mane because it actually has this neurogenesis property that is very rare. I don't remember reading about any other substance from the natural world doing that. It helps neurons to grow again and regenerate and make new connections, which is absolutely amazing. So those are both, again, now available in the shop, mythicmedicine.love. And speaking of herbs, one of my favorite herbalists and most amazing medicine makers that I know of, Rebecca Altman, is my guest today. We talk about how the journey through grief, depression, and getting on and then getting off of 5 different pharmaceuticals at once led Rebecca into herbalism. Meeting the spirit of a place and seeing your home through new eyes. Sexy desert plants, creosote, also known as chaparral or Larrea, and ocotillo. Where there is no word for magic because it's just a normal part of life, and why believing in magic makes us human. The West's missing rites of initiation and why we have such a hard time adulting. Realizing that no one is going to tell you that you belong, that you have the gift, that you are magical. It's just something that at some point you decide to step into your own power. The humoural approach to herbalism and healing. Why knowing your personal balance of temperaments, sanguine, choleric, meloncholic, and phlegmatic, can help you to know yourself better. The debilitating cultural preference / lie embedded in the hero's journey. The virtues of working inefficiently. I love this part of the conversation. I really, really needed this wisdom from Rebecca. And a practice to get you rooted and step back inside yourself, reconnecting to what we have to cut off in order to get things done quicker and better. And then we really dive into root medicine. And as part of this episode, Rebecca has created a beautiful 19-page PDF all about root medicine for Patreon supporters of this podcast. So that's at patreon.com/medicine stories for supporters at the $2 a month level. 19 pages of deep-rooted medicine. Within it, you'll find writings about roots, the importance of finding roots and standing your own ground, whatever that looks like for you. There are descriptions of 6 different medicinal roots: kava, spikenard or aurelia, devil's club, mullein root, ashwaganda, and shatavari. We talk about those last 2 a lot in this episode too. And recipes to start using roots in a more playful way: chai, a bath, infused ghee, and a body oil, to broaden the reach of how you use roots and root medicine in your life. Rebecca truly is like a gifted formulator. She's prolific and gifted, always coming out with new medicines that just reading about them blows my mind. So these are the recipes of a real witch, a real Scottish witch. Rebecca is a writer and herbalist, originally from Scotland, living in the mountains of Southern California. She makes herbal formulas, which she sells at her web shop, Kings Road Apothecary, and more recently has started a year-long course called the Wonder Sessions, in which she teaches people to connect more deeply to the hidden world around us. So yeah, without further ado, let's dive into this interview with Rebecca Altman. Hello, Rebecca. Welcome to Medicine Stories.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I think I was just thinking about it before this call, and I think we've just been connected online for like a decade or something.
It's been a really long time.
Yeah, since through Kiva Rose, and sort of the community that she gathered around herself back in the like late 2000s, blogging about herbalism.
Yes, and then the Traditions Conference, and although you went for the first time
when we met, in 2017, the Good Medicine Confluence,
Yes. But yes, through the same community for a long time.
Yeah, and it was lovely to meet you. And I don't think I've thanked you, but I was just kind of not alone there. I had my baby and my good friend Kat, but you were very welcoming to me as someone with like a long-standing relationship with that conference, and I was grateful for it.
Oh, thank you, and you're so welcome. It was really just such a pleasure to finally meet you after kind of dancing around each other online for so long.
Yeah, and then we have a mutual friend as well, and my very dear friend Jen, who lives here in Nevada City and who is just probably my closest friend, and her daughter is my 12-year-old's good friend. And I remember somehow you got brought up years ago, and she was like, "I actually know Rebecca from living in Palm Desert," and I was like, "What? You do?"
Yes, it's so strange. The store that her sister used to own had a cafe in it where I used to work. And then my closest friend in the world lived at Jen's house for a while. Like it's so funny. There's so many connections there.
Wow. Yeah, that's Harvest Health Food Store in Palm Desert. Okay, so my first question, it's a big question, and I don't think you're going to answer it in like a few minutes or anything. I think it could take us a while to get through all of it, but knowing some of your story and having read your newsletters for years, I'm seeing like this bigger pattern, this bigger story emerge here. So I would like to ask you about this experience you had when you were 18 and how it brought you into the worlds of depression, and that led you into pharmaceutical use and how that messed you up for a long time, and then what brought you out of that and onto the plant path. And then after that, I was thinking, sorry to lay this huge thing out in front of you, and I'll guide it as we go, but that we could talk a little bit about your understanding of depression and how you work to help people through that now.
I would love to talk about all of this. Um, so let's see. When I was 18, my stepsister committed suicide. And I was at the time, I'm from Scotland and I moved to California with my family when I was 16. And I'd gone back to Scotland to go to university. And there's a funny thing that happens when you get used to the Southern Californian sunlight and then move to somewhere that rains maybe 300 days a year, um, where I was just miserable in a way just because it was so rainy all the time anyway. And I had some close friends here in California and I missed them. And so I was kind of like not doing that well in the first place at university. Um, and then I got a phone call one day, and my stepsister had committed suicide, and I dropped out of university and moved home, and I sunk into a really deep depression. In part, I think due to the grieving process, because as I think most people know, losing a family member is devastating. And in part, I think due to just, being a bit lost in life. And, there's so many questions when somebody you're close to takes their own life, because, there's always questions. And so anyway, I was really, really depressed. And I went to my doctor for a checkup, and I kind of mentioned that I wasn't doing so well. And they sent me to a psychiatrist who spent maybe 15 minutes with me and said, yes, I know what the problem is here. You're bipolar. And I remember at the time I was actually like, that was really sort of confusing and upsetting to me in a way, because I was like, but I thought I was just quirky. Like it was really sort of difficult for me to hear that, like, all of these things that I had just thought made me like naturally quirky were all of a sudden considered quote unquote a disorder. And but at the same time I was in so much emotional pain. And so when this man said, yes, you have a disorder, this is what's happening, and there are medications that you can take that will take your pain away, I was like, yeah, give me the drugs, man. um and so I ended up, like, long story short, I mean, this is a long story, it's not short, but to try and shorten the long story, it I ended up over the course of time on 5 different medications. And it got to the point where I didn't know who I was. I didn't know where I was. I was so emotionally volatile. Like, I couldn't trust my own reactions to things. And I remember one time I was at UCSB at the time studying book arts, and I would go to the printmaking studio at night and be there all night because I could be there on my own and play music. And I remember one time I just like crawled under one of the big tables there and just started sobbing. And I was like, I feel so lost and I have no idea what's going on. And morning must have come around because my teacher, who was the head of the art department, came in, and like he kind of looked at me and I could see in his eyes like there's something wrong. Um, and then a few weeks later, my mom called me and she was like, look, I think you should move home. And she handled everything. She actually dropped me out of school and, you know, moved me back in to their house and took me to a different psychiatrist. And I just remember saying, like, my mom saying to the psychiatrist, like, I don't know what's going on, but I want to see what's underneath all of these medications because this isn't my daughter. And it's funny looking back because I have been through similar things with clients, and the psychiatrist basically like gave me a plan. I was like, yeah, so you just need to taper off all your medication and then stop taking your medications, and then that's it. And so I was like, all right. And so
So
I never went
you
back.
also you wanted to get off too.
I wanted to get off. I was such a wreck. I was also terrified to get off because it had been, I think, 4 years at that time, and I didn't know. I genuinely at this point thought I was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And so the psychiatrist just gave me a plan and then sent me home to taper myself off 5 different medications. And then a few weeks later, my parents, because I have a little sister who's 16 years younger than me, my parents moved to Orange County. And thankfully, they couldn't sell their house where I was staying. So I managed, like, I was basically staying in this house all on my own and started tapering myself off medications. And this was like pre-Facebook, which is probably good because there would be my mental state would have been documented for all to see for eternity. But there were some online forums basically where people talked about the withdrawal effects, which is the only reason that I knew that the things that were happening in my body were normal. Because if I thought I was crazy before, that is nothing compared to the effects of withdrawing from 5 different pharmaceuticals at the same time. And basically, I've had so many clients since then who have tried to withdraw and haven't been able to. And I understand completely, because I think the only reason I could was that I was so, like, I had this kind of confluence of amazing privileges that allowed me to do it in a very safe way. But it is an actual living hell because you cannot trust anything that your brain is coming up with. Like your emotions change all the time. Your thoughts are just like coming up with things that aren't even controllable. It was awful, and that took about 6 months to taper off fully, and then probably another 2 years until I felt like I was myself again. But in the process of this withdrawal, I had a friend who was a yoga teacher, and she was like, you should start doing yoga. So I got a job cleaning a yoga studio in exchange for classes. And so I would go and do yoga 2 times a day. And one time I walked into a class and a man was sitting there and he looked up at me and he says, do you want a job? I was like, well, what do you do? And he said, I'm a herbalist. And I was like, sure. And so this man, he had a health food store in Palm Desert where he sold herbs, and he'd studied Chinese medicine in London, and he taught me about herbs and took me under his wing. And he taught me about nutrition and blood sugar levels, and that maybe for someone with as much energy as me, like living on sugar and caffeine wasn't a good thing. And he taught me about things like liver chi stagnation and repressed emotions, and like there were so many things that he taught me about that towards the end of my time working for him, I was like, wow, maybe I'm not actually bipolar. Maybe I was just, treating myself in ways that weren't actually good for me, that were causing me to have like extreme emotional reactions.
Like the food you were eating, or like your lifestyle?
The food I was eating. I basically lived on sugar and sweet caffeine drinks.
And of course, your psychiatrist didn't ask about your diet.
Of course not. Of course not. Well, that's irrelevant. Completely irrelevant. Yeah, it's funny looking back that like now working in this field, it is so obvious. But I think in our society we're not taught that the things that we do can have an impact on our mood. We're sort of taught that it's an arbitrary thing that happens to us in a way, and not that, your thought processes, the things you eat, your exercise patterns, the pace that you live at, your connections, your friendships, all of these different things contribute to how you feel, which in some ways is so obvious, but it wasn't at the time. And I think so many of us are taught from such an early age that these things are arbitrary, and that we can't do anything about how we feel, but we can take something that will change how, like, stop us feeling bad, basically. Um, yeah, in a way, it's so incredibly disempowering how we're taught that we have no control over our feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so in the process of that, sorry, I keep getting emails, and I don't know how to switch it off. In the process of that, I started hiking, and this was in Palm Desert, and there's a hiking trail there that's like a really popular hiking trail that I think like the entire population of Palm Desert does, and I started doing that every day, sometimes twice a day, and in the process of just spending so much time outside this place, like, I mean, I moved to Palm Desert from Scotland, and Scotland is very green and lush, and Palm Desert, especially in the summer, is sort of like brown and hilly. And there were many times after moving there that I would just look at these mountains and just think, oh God, it's so dead here. And it was so fascinating to me starting to hike and starting to see these mountains close up and realizing, oh my goodness, this isn't dead. This place is really alive. And then how woo woo can I get with you?
Quite.
Okay, good. um, yeah, one day I was out hiking and I sort of met the spirit of the mountain. At least it felt like the spirit of the mountain. Um, Granted, keep in mind, like after being told that I was insane for years, this was very scary. But it's interesting how there are experiences that you feel so viscerally that you absolutely can't doubt that they're real. Um, yeah, and I started meeting this spirit out there and feeling it and feeling this feeling of being held. And so every time I would start to get, volatile due to the withdrawal process or due to maybe being a volatile person in general, I would just head straight for the mountain and I would go, and there was a spot about a mile and a half up where I would just curl into this kind of alcove in the mountain and I would just lie there until I felt better. And in many ways, I feel like the desert saved my life. It was spending time out there that I started realizing that I'm not really that important, which is a really good feeling. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so that's how I got into herbs, and that's how I got into plants and nature. It was sort of like a calling. Like it got to the point where I couldn't really stay away from it because it felt like such an integral part of who I was.
And to think, like, what if that had been your prescription when you were 18?
Right. Right. Although I have to say I'm so grateful to have gone through that, because I don't know if I would value the kind of hard-earned lessons as much if I hadn't fought for them and had to kind of claw my way out of this place. Like I don't know if I would trust my own feelings and direction as much. So I am grateful for the experience, but it was hell, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone else.
It's interesting too, hearing you talk about how you perceived the desert as just being sort of brown and lifeless, because now I think of you as such a desert person. You post so often about your adventures out there, and you work with the herbs. And I've never had much of a connection with desert landscapes. And then I've been down there now with Jen twice, and in March both times. So I was introduced to blooming creosote.
Oh my God.
Oh my gosh. We took a hike. It might have been the trail you're talking about. It was a pretty well traveled trail. And and she introduced me to that plant, and I had some with me in my car for a long time after that. And the smell, oh my gosh,
It smells incredible.
it's so special. And then someone sent me an infused body oil made with it, so I have that
Oh,
scent
wow.
captured. Yeah, it's amazing. And the ocotillo also.
Oh my goodness.
And these are like kind of, I mean, they're not herbs that people in the mainstream maybe know so much about, but for sure they're kind of like superstars in the herbal world. They're like sexy herbs.
They're totally sexy herbs,
And
which
they're
is
so
funny because
special.
they're like, I've like, especially creosote, like it's just everywhere out here. But it is, yeah, they're totally. I was watching a British gardening show last week, and the host says something about, exotic plants like agave, and I was like, it's just funny. Um, yeah, but that's interesting. I think that a lot of bioregional herbs are very sexy in the herb world. Um, I noticed that, like, the Pacific Northwest herbs that I can't get here are like, they're sexy to me. If someone,
Mm-hmm.
I have a client in the Pacific Northwest, and whenever she's out hiking, she sends me photos of Devil's Club, and I'm like, oh, wow, so
Mm-hmm.
cool. Um, yeah, I think maybe that's a very human thing to think it's exotic what we don't have next to us.
Right. And I also had a somewhat similar experience. I grew up in South Lake Tahoe, and then actually went through pretty major depression and anxiety at the same age. And I'm wondering now if that's pretty common for like the late teens, early 20s. I think it must be. It's just a hard transition into
It
grown
really
upness. And we
is.
aren't taught how to be grown ups. Like when I look back and I'm like, I can't believe I like left my home at 18 and moved far away and thought I could handle my shit. I didn't
Right.
know anything.
We are not taught how to be grown-ups, and we don't have any rites of initiation,
Yeah.
which is really interesting. Have you read any of Malidoma Some's books?
I am familiar with his work and I've heard him on podcasts, and I was just this week being like, I need to dive deeper.
He is amazing. I had the privilege of meeting him a few months ago, and his books really changed my life in so many ways. In part because the way he talks about magic and ritual, um, and and the fact that, for people who aren't familiar with him, he is an African elder who has had a fascinating life, and his book, I think it's called Of Water and Spirit, describes his early life growing up in Burkina Faso and then being sent away to a Jesuit school, and how he, over the course of his life, has come to realize that people in the West need to learn about indigenous culture. And he talks about magic and ritual in a way, and I think he says somewhere that there is no word for magic where he grew up because it's such an integral part of
Mm.
life that it's just normal. And people talk about, like, what who we would call fairies, like that's, they exist and they're real. It's not just like here where you start, people say, oh, are you away with the fairies, as if to say, are you crazy? Like, no, the spirit world is a very real part of life. And for so many cultures around the world, this is very real. And yet for us here in the West, it's not talked about. We don't have a language for it. It is seen as like woo woo or crazy or out there. And, and everyone meets everything you say, like, with, oh, but you can't prove that. Where's the scientific studies about that? And it's like, how can you prove that which cannot be proven because it doesn't exist in the world of logic? Um, so anyway, his books. I had a point. I don't remember.
Mm-hmm.
This is the problem when I start talking.
Yeah, initiation.
Oh yeah, so he talks about the initiations that they go through in his culture when when children are becoming adults, and how important it is for a person to sort of um, learn who they are in this way. And it is it's something that we don't have. And so most of us, when we're becoming adults, don't know our place in the world. And I don't mean that in the British way of like, know your place, but in the sense of like knowing who you are and where you stand and where you belong and what you're here for.
Yeah, I am familiar with Maladoma's work through his emphasis on the ancestors, and which is to me the most foundational piece of knowing who you are. And it's interesting what you bring up with how do I know it's real, because I just last weekend did a 3-day intensive ancestral lineage healing with people who work and have been trained under Dr. Daniel Four, who was on episode 26 of the podcast. And it was so profound. And I had the most amazing journeys and encounters with this ancestral spirit guide from my pure paternal lineage. Like it was like a movie unfolding before me every time I journeyed and met this man and learned from him. And but what came up for so many people during the workshop is like, well, yeah, I just had this experience, but like, is it real? Is it real? Is it real?
Yeah.
And mine was so big during the workshop that I didn't really question it. But then in the days since I have, was
Mm-hmm.
that real? Did I just make it up? And it's just such an we don't realize like this Western logical materialistic culture is just the water we swim in, and we
Yes.
take it for granted that it's the only truth, that the only real things are things you can see and
Yes.
prove. And so it's interesting to watch so many people during the intensive wrestle with that, and then to watch myself do it. And one thing that I kind of came to is, even if I'm making it up, which I don't think I am, and like no traditional cultures think they're making it
Right.
up when they're talking with their ancestors or the spirits of the
Right.
land or the plants. But even if I am, I'm at least engaging in a deeply ancestral human practice, because people have always done this. They have always felt, sensed, and communicated with the spirits of place or of their ancestors or of all number of
Yes.
animate beings.
Yeah. I think the conclusion I came to, um, this that I studied with a group of shamans based in Louisville for about 10 years. And for 10 years in my training, I kept sort of waiting for someone to tell me that I belonged there, because I had never felt like a person who was deeply connected. Like I've never seen spirits. I've never had like prophetic dreams. I've never had any of the things that sort of we think of as making somebody more connected to the spirit world in a way. So I kept waiting for somebody to tell me that I belonged there, or that I was somehow special, or
Yeah, you've
um,
got the gift.
yeah, totally. It was like, I mean, these are the, like, I think so many of the stories that we hear as well. It's like Harry Potter, like, you're a wizard, Harry. I was like
Mm-hmm.
waiting. I wanted to be a wizard, Harry. Um,
I gotta say, I was just thinking about that, and like how the foundation of that book, the starting point of that book, just immediately captures everyone's attention, because
everyone.
we can all relate with being an orphan child and then being told, actually, you do belong to these super
Yes.
magical people over here. Now let's
Yes,
go initiate
totally.
you.
Yes. And I wanted that so badly. And in the same way as I wanted someone to come along and put their hand on my shoulder and say, yes, this is real. And it occurred to me, and it was honestly about 10 years later, or 10 years into it, that no one was going to tell me that I belonged. No one was going to tell me that I deserved it. And no one was going to confirm to me that it was real, that I sort of had to take the step in on my own. And it was very, very scary, because in doing that, you're risking your own sanity, which, given my history, I think is my greatest fear. Um, and your sanity, your credibility, there's so many things there that are on the line. And then one day I just realized I don't want to live in the world where everything is cynical and where none of this exists. And if this makes me crazy, then I would rather be crazy and feel content and complete and happy and like I have a place in the world and like I have invisible friends in the trees and the rocks and the mountains. And I'm okay with that.
Right.
But what I don't want is to live in a world where I don't trust anything. That to me is more scary than losing my mind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And even if it is untrue, which we will never know, first of all, it's worth it. It's worth it to live your life believing in it.
Yes.
You're happier and more connected and more rooted.
Yes.
And more human.
And more human. Yes.
So I want to finish the thought I was having earlier and connect us back to what we were previously speaking about, which is grew up in South Lake Tahoe, and years after I finished college, 5 or 6 years later, is when I started studying herbalism. And at the time, I lived where I do now in the Grass Valley, Nevada City area of Northern California, and I was just falling in love with the plants around here, and like they're so amazing, and like too bad all we had in Tahoe was pine trees. It's so lame and boring. And then, you know, over time I'd go back in the summers and I'd be like, oh, wait a minute. Oh, here's Artemisia douglassiana, here's mugwort. Oh, here's Artemisia tridentata, sagebrush grows here too. Oh, there's yarrow. Oh, there's coyote mint. Like, you know, just and all of a sudden it's like, oh, sorry, there's hundreds of beautiful medicinal plants here that I had just not seen before because I hadn't been deeply attuned to the place.
Isn't that funny?
It is funny. And then, you know, the desert being like the archetypal barren landscape, which is not in any way.
It's not at all. It's funny to me now when people say like, oh, it's a desert. And I'm like, what? You mean rich in life, really biodiverse, really beautiful when you look up close? And they're like, that's not what I meant.
Well, extremely special creatures and plants living there because they've evolved in such extreme conditions.
Yes. And really, there's something about when storms roll through the desert, there's something so insanely powerful about this sort of meeting of elements, this kind of confluence of things that are complete opposite to each other. Sorry, I dropped the microphone. I dropped my earpiece. Yeah, these complete opposites, and then the rain comes, and it's like the most insanely powerful feeling. It's so beautiful.
Sounds amazing. So, okay, this is another question that kind of ties in two big things. So, okay. One thing that we sometimes look at on this podcast is mythic archetypes that really call to us. And when I asked you about this before we talked, you went on a wonderful rant about this idea of the hero's journey. And I agree with you and all that you have to say about that. So I'm going to ask you to rant for us on the hero's journey. And then at the end, too, you tied it into the four humors approach to herbalism. And I wanted to talk to you about that too, because this is an ancestral idea that many people have turned away from, you know, that is like, oh, we discredited that long ago. Like, let's move past that. And I honestly don't entirely understand it. And I want to, because the way that you and Jim McDonald use it is clearly useful. And so, yeah, that's go.
Okay. Let's see. I'll start with the humors. I learned about the four humors from my friend Jim McDonald, who learned about the four humors from Christopher Headley, who learned about the four humors from Galen, though not directly, because that would be big stretch of time. And
because Galen is an ancient Greek.
Yes, thank you for clarifying. Yeah, I think there's like a few thousand years spanning that. And it's a constitutional system, basically, that Jim teaches and Jim and I teach together. And the one of the main aspects of it is this idea of the humoural temperaments, which is the kind of expression of the four humours in our personalities. And we all contain all four of these humors that express in our temperaments. So we are all four temperaments in various combinations, and they will express in different areas of our lives in different ways. But these four temperaments are sanguine, choleric, phlegmatic, and melancholic. And they correspond roughly to the four elements of air, fire, water, and earth. And I'll give you a very, very quick overview of each of them just so that we have some kind of context for this. The air element, which expresses in the sanguine temperament, is quick moving, all over the place, literally. And it expresses in our personalities in being quick moving and all over the place. So when you meet someone who has a large expression of the sanguine temperament, they are outgoing, gregarious. They tend to have lots of very quick ideas, lots of energy. They tend to love people and love being around people, and whoever they're with in the moment is their closest friend in the world. They love revelry, they love parties, they love music and dancing and drinking and experimentation. And, these are the people who are like, sure, I'll try anything once. And they are such fun to be around. Normally the most likable initially of all the temperaments, because they are so kind of extroverted and interested in other people. The second one is fire element, which expresses in the choleric temperament. And the choleric temperament is everyone is going to be familiar with all of these, but the choleric temperament we are all the most familiar with because we live in a society that was created by cholerics and is run by cholerics. So cholerics are efficient, on time, productive, driven, focused, fast. And if you think about it, this is sort of the epitome of what we see as a good person in society. Like cholerics make direct eye contact and like have a strong handshake, and they're, the types of people who other cholerics meet and go, well, they seem like a stand-up person. And because cholerics are the people who tend to say, oh, I know what needs to be done here. Like, let's get this in order. Let's make this more efficient. They are the ones who sort of created the structure for our society and tend to be the ones who rise into positions of authority more quickly because they're the ones who'll say, I'll take care of this. Nobody's getting anything done here, so I'm going to step in. And because cholerics run the society, and one of the, let's say, less positive traits of a choleric person is that they tend to find it very difficult to see outside of their own worldview. So, I'll tell you about phlegmatics in a minute, and phlegmatics are the opposite. That's water, and phlegmatics tend to be very empathetic and find it very easy to sort of step into other people's emotions and lives, and can really sort of get a feeling for how someone else feels. Cholerics are, in order to move forward as quickly as they do, they sort of are naturally cut off from their connections to the world. So cholerics don't really see other types of personalities outside their own because that's how they are. That's what they see as a kind of quote unquote good personality. And so all of the other temperaments who are like natural, it's a natural way for other people to be other ways in the world. Cholerics don't really see that. They see that as like, well, you just need to be more efficient. Like, why aren't you getting this done fast enough? It's like every time a choleric gives a phlegmatic person advice, and it's like, well, why don't you just write a list? I'm guilty of that myself, and it's so we live in a choleric society, basically, and people who are cholerics living in a choleric society My friend Rosalie de la Forette, she came up with this term. She calls it choleric privilege, where if you're choleric and live in a choleric society, you have immense privilege because you are the way that society wants people to be. Phlegmatics are water, and they tend to be empathetic. They live for connections with other people, like to have, a 3-hour conversation with a friend where you make like deep eye contact and really feel like you're getting to know another person is like the phlegmatic dream. Phlegmatics love to move at their own pace, which is usually very slowly. Like they really want to feel things, and if you push a phlegmatic too fast, it really, really flusters them because it's like they need to be able to kind of feel into a situation. Phlegmatics are feelers. Like they cook by feel. They like meet people and determine if they like them based on their feelings. And they're the people who say, I feel this, I feel that. And it is a personality trait or phlegmatic personalities are most commonly associated with being female, but it's not actually exclusive to people with female reproductive organs. It's just that in our society, we have kind of classified like, well, women are supposed to be like this and men are supposed to be like cholerics. But, as you probably all know, there are plenty of men who are able to be empathetic and plenty of women who are very focused and driven. And we all contain all of these. And I think it's yet another one of the things that is messed up about our society, that we try and tell people, what gender they should be and how they should act based on that. But where did I go? Oh, and then the last one is the melancholic, which is earth. And melancholics are quiet observers. And these are the people who are, least likely to be chatterboxes to strangers. They tend to be very kind of taciturn and stoic and like to really observe a situation for a long time before jumping in. No, they don't jump in. They will like tactfully step in when it is deemed okay to do so. Melancholics do not phone you back. I say that for the benefit of my mother, who like despairs that my melancholic brother doesn't call her very often. They'll like see a missed call and be like, "Oh, that's so nice that person called me," but they don't call back because it's like, I don't know. The melancholics don't really. They'll have a few people in their life who they're very close to who won't even see them as introverted because they'll be so kind of goofy and open around them. But then for the rest of the people, they are very, I call it the kind of stonewall. They don't emote, which isn't to say that they don't feel, because they feel so much, but they keep it to themselves. It's like they don't need to share. I'm sure everyone knows melancholics. And I am sort of on a crusade in life to help melancholics be more understood, because I feel like if people could understand that they do like people, are happy to be there, they just don't want to talk a lot, it would do so much for melancholics, because they're really, really misunderstood, and people think they're antisocial and people think they don't like them. And it's like, no, they just want to be left alone. And, I think the greatest gift you can give your melancholic is to just let them be. So anyway, these are the 4 temperaments. And I mentioned that we live in a choleric society. And one of the things that arises from this choleric society is the fact that we live with choleric myths. And one of those myths is the hero's journey. And we have all been raised with these stories, whether it's Odysseus or it's Luke Skywalker or I can't think of any others right now.
But just so many.
Just so many. It's like this lone person who is special somehow and changes the course of humanity with their own humble Frodo.
Mm-hmm. I was just literally just picturing Frodo.
Yeah. Um, and and so we're sort of kind of raised to believe that I, the individual, I'm on this journey where I can be the hero and the hero of my own myth. And in some ways, this is very important because, all four of these temperaments are very important. And without this choleric myth in society and in ourselves, we don't move forwards. We don't have progress, for better or worse. We don't get anything done. We don't have organization or efficiency. But that choleric, without any of the other temperaments and without seeing the beautiful benefits of all of these other temperaments, is just out of control. And I think this is what's happened in society, because cholerics don't necessarily see the other temperaments as, they don't see them as kind of valid expressions of life in themselves. It's like, well, you're deficient in choler. We could fix you by giving you a to-do list. Um, because these other temperaments aren't seen as necessarily valid or important, we don't hear the phlegmatic myths. We don't hear, the stories of the person who changed the world by like having a deep conversation with somebody who felt lost and broken. We don't hear about the court jester who livened the spirits of everyone with their sanguine temperament and sent everyone home feeling so much better about themselves and their life, and how that changed the course of the world. We don't hear about the melancholic hero who, when the sanguine king wanted to set off on a like completely unthought out plan, the melancholic stepped in and said, yes, but have you thought about this and this and this and how all of this could go wrong, and changed the course of the future by quietly observing and a few well-placed sentences. Like we don't hear these stories and we don't value them, and therefore in ourselves, these aspects of ourselves are also not seen as important. And I think there's an example of this. I was talking to my very, very choleric husband about this choleric society, and he was like, yeah, but like, what would you have, like a phlegmatic society? And I was like, well, I think it would be really interesting to try a phlegmatic society. I think it would drive all of us crazy because we'd all be like crying and connecting all the time. Um, and he was like, yeah, so, we need a choleric society because otherwise we would be inefficient. And I was like, but if not for you having the worldview of a choleric society, you would not see being efficient as the most important thing. And the look on his face, he was just like, oh, like, wait a minute. Like, efficiency is only important because I'm choleric and I live in a choleric society. I was like, yeah, like, sometimes it's really nice to do something inefficiently. And I think all of a sudden, like, the way he sees the way I work, which is very inefficient, it was like, oh, wait, like, you don't need to do things the most fast, efficient, and productive way possible. And I'm like, no, how about you enjoy it? Like, how about, there's so many different ways that you can move through life. And I think it's beautiful for us to get to experience that and enjoy it in each other and respect it in each other. And if we had more myths about this, I think it would change society.
It makes me think that we only like do myth in a pretty specific formula in this culture, and it's the stories that are going to make a really good movie, like Lord of the
Yeah.
Rings or Harry Potter or Star Wars. But sometimes if you like go really deep into old folklore books, or you'll read a story and like it makes no sense. It doesn't
Yeah.
resolve in the way you're used to, and nothing heroic happened.
Right.
And they're hard to digest. I have to sit with them and be like, what is really happening here, because this isn't the formula I'm used to.
Totally.
But there's wisdom there. And man, just like thinking about this choleric framework, because that sounds the most like me of the four that you talked about. But
Mm-hmm.
I also feel like a lot of it is like forced upon me because I run a business, I do this podcast, and I have a 2-year-old. And so I
Uh-huh.
have to be efficient with like the 2 or 3 hours a day I have to try to do all that stuff.
Right.
And then I really almost always end up feeling pretty crazy at the end of those few hours because I'm like, I
Yes.
just like tried to fit so much in. And I just recently changed the way I do packaging and shipping. I used
Hmm.
to like lay out all the bottles and get all the boxes in one and like sort of what's that called, like production line, you know.
Hmm.
And now I do it one package at a time, which means I'm moving much more often. I'm not standing still in one place doing a repetitive
Uh-huh.
motion over and over. Now I like tape open the box, get the medicine, wrap it up, put it in, turn around, write the name, print the thing out, get, you know. And it means I'm moving more often and I'm enjoying it so much more because I got myself out of that super efficiency mindset.
That's really nice. I mean, Adam Smith would, have a heart attack. He wrote Wealth
Yeah,
of Nations, and
right.
yeah, he came
Yeah.
up with a production line.
Henry Ford,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, totally. Um, but yeah, see, it's really interesting to sort of undo these ideas of like, wait, what happens if I don't do things in this choleric, efficient way? And there's something really interesting. I've noticed in myself, the more I try and step outside of doing that, not to be rebellious, but because I think it's really important to learn our own rhythms and learn where our sort of our midpoint, or like the crossover of like enjoying our work and finding pleasure in it and finding nourishment in it and still being able to move forwards. There's a there's a place in the middle there where you can still feel your body and still be able to process and still be working. And I think we in society, we're also trained to want to move as fast as possible, that we cut ourselves off in order to do that. And I think that there's also, I think this really kind of represents what happens what's happening in the world right now, especially in California with the drought situation. Like I see the phlegmatic as being this like nourishing yin aspect of our lives and our personalities, where we are kind of fed in the same way as, like, if you have a really beautiful, deep conversation with someone who you're close to, it nourishes you. Or if you get a beautiful hug from someone, it's nourishing. And then we we cut all of this off in order to get things done as quickly as possible and efficiently as possible. And I think this is why there's so much inefficiency in our culture in the West. And I think this is me getting a bit woo-woo again, but I think the drought is a direct reflection of our need to move as quickly as possible.
Mm.
So
That's not woo woo. You know, this it's a result of human actions and humans and greed
yeah,
and that, yeah, efficiency mindset and
yeah,
extractive mindset, which can so go hand in hand.
yeah, you're right.
You're beautifully transitioning into what I wanted to talk about next, which is this. So you send out incredible newsletters, and we'll give
Thank you.
people the opportunity to sign up at the end. But like, I mean, they're like books. I mean, first of all, if you put them all together, I'm sure you'd have a book. But it's very, very like deeply woven plant medicine information in
Thank you.
here. Yes,
Yeah,
yeah. I mean,
yeah.
they're so
They're
good. I'm
so
always
good.
like, everyone needs to be reading what I'm reading right now. And you recently did one on deep roots for stressful times.
uh,
And it's talking about a lot of what we're talking about right now: the fires, the drought, exhaustion, and stress, and listening to our bodies. And how do you work with root medicine in these times?
oh, thinking to organize
Yeah,
thoughts.
yeah. And I
You're right.
was,
It totally ties in with the choleric thing.
yeah.
Uh, there's, I think it would be easier for me to show you with an exercise. Do you mind?
No,
Oh,
please.
we do that. Okay. So if you can close your eyes, and everyone listening, if you're not driving, please do the same. If you're driving, please keep your eyes open. This is very important. And start to take a few deep breaths. And as you breathe, start to feel your breath moving into your body on the inhale and leaving your body on the exhale. And now start to scan your body and look for areas where you might be holding tension. It could be your forehead, your jaw, your shoulders, your belly, your pelvic floor, your chest. And now just choose one of those areas. And pick that area, and as you keep breathing, but start to tense it more. And tense it more. And you're going to keep tensing it until you can't really tense it anymore. And you should notice as you keep tensing that it's going to start to contort your body a little, or maybe a lot. And when you're tensing it so hard that you're almost shaking with it, take a deep inhale and then drop it all and breathe. And breathe to that area where you were tensing. And if you move it around a little bit. Now, feel for the earth underneath you. Feel its solidness underneath you. Feel its nurturing nature underneath you. And feel where the earth is pressing against your body. It might be physically that you can feel your body touching the earth, or it might be energetically that you can feel the earth pressing against your energy. Wherever it is that the earth is touching you, breathe to that place and soften it. And try not to overthink this. Just let the earth in. Let that nurturing, nourishing, solid, stable energy into your body. And just keep breathing. And allow it to feed you. In a way, it's like you're taking a step back inside yourself and allowing it to happen. Like you're doing the opposite of actively drawing it in, and just allowing it to do what it naturally does. And then when you're ready, open your eyes. Does the world look different?
Softer.
Yeah.
And I feel deeply reminded of what nourishes me.
Yeah.
And it's right there.
It's right there.
It's so easy to ignore it when I'm in my choleric mindset.
Right. All of us. I think this is what we cut off in order to get things done better, quicker, more efficiently.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, I think, our natural state of being, where you can still, move around the world like this and get things done. I mean, granted, I'm often very spacey like this. I need a list. But what I try and do is move through the world and work and drive and handle all the things I need to handle from this place, so that I'm no longer burning through resources in order to achieve things. And this, to me, is sort of the essence of what root medicine is, like remaining rooted while still moving about the world.
And do you work with actual roots?
Yes, sorry, that was
to get you there.
I love working with roots. I love working with roots. It's funny. I mentioned the bioregional stuff earlier, and I really like working with bioregionals. But in this regard, one of my favorites is actually Devil's Club, because I feel like it really ties in so deeply to that like old earth energy.
It's not a plant. I know it's in the Pacific Northwest. I know it's very powerful and special and beautiful. It's one of those, you see a photo of it and you're like, oh,
wow,
hello.
And I'm very lucky that I have a friend up there who's sent me some, and I probably, you know what, I am going to change that, because I think it's a bit unfair in a way to talk about something that's like a bit plant elitist, isn't it? To be like, well, this one thing that not very many people can get, but I have a friend who sends me some. Sorry about that. Let's see. In oh my goodness, shatavari. There we go. Shatavari is sort of epitomizes to me that that soft, deep, nourishing, yin, slow, earthy, moist energy. I'm really trying to get used to saying the word moist.
Oh, are you one of those people who hates it?
Yep. And it, Jim McDonald, every time we're teaching, he loves like throwing moists in there all the time and like giving me looks. I'm trying to get used to it so that I'm, not giving people ammunition to mess with me. But shatavari, I think sort of epitomizes that. Like it really, it helps people to build back up their kind of deep root, nourished energy, but at the same time, it doesn't give people like an energy boost. It just sort of builds back up your reserves. And I think over time, it really serves to soften our bodies, but also soften the way we interact with the world.
Yeah, that's when I hear you and see you post about it. I mean, my impression is that you like drink it every day in tea.
Every day.
Yeah.
Every day. That was Thomas easily got me doing that, actually. Because I was having some gallbladder issues and talking to him about it. And he's like, yeah, well, you're really, really dry. I mean, do you drink infusions? And I was like, well, I teach about them. He's like,
I tell other people too.
Yeah. He's like, but do you take them yourself? And I was like, well, like consistency isn't really my strong point. And like he gets this look on his face and he goes, okay, I challenge you to do the 14-day shatavari infusion challenge. And I was like I can be very choleric. And I was like, what? A challenge? Oh yeah? I'll show you. I'm going to be like the biggest infusion drinker in the world. I'm going to be the moistest person you ever meet. He's like, my work here is done. So I did the 14-day shatavari infusion challenge that he made up on the spot and carried on. And I've been drinking it every day for a couple of years now. And it, I think in many ways it changed my life because I didn't really consider myself to be a soft person at all. Um, and it's over the course of the time that I've been drinking it. Obviously, lots of other things have happened. But I feel like shatavari in many ways has taught me how to soften and let the world in and let other people in and let connections in. Yeah, I'm very, very, very fond of that plant. It's the first plant I sent out. I teach a course on connecting to connecting to the hidden world and the spirit world and connecting to the earth and connecting to ourselves. And shatavari is the first plant that I send out for that because I think it teaches so much about letting things in.
We will talk about that. I want to hear more about that. And I'm very intrigued now. And of course, I'm going to challenge myself to this 14-day infusion.
Yeah, this would be amazing if more people do this Thomas Easley's 14-day infusion challenge.
You also mentioned ashwagandha in here, and this is, I think, another like sexy, buzzy herb. And also not one I have much experience with, although we grew it this year and just harvested it. And I think we're going to tincture it. How do you work with it, and what's your understanding of ashwagandha?
I love it in tincture and I love it in powder. And actually, I think the traditional way, when I was in India, I was talking to an Ayurvedic herbalist who told me to simmer ashwagandha root in milk and drink it that way. But I enjoy the powder stirred in. I mix the powder with cocoa and drink that at night. It's really nice. I think ashwagandha, to me, it tastes and smells like chocolate. Now, to some people, there's a herbalist here in Southern California called Julie James, and she's an amazing herbalist and teacher, and she is very vocal about how much she dislikes the smell of ashwagandha. And the first time we talked about it, I was like, "What? But it smells like chocolate." And she was like, "It smells like horse urine." And that was the first time I learned that some people don't like it. I think it's sort of like the cilantro thing. Like some people, love it and some people hate it.
I just have to say that we dried the roots in the room I sleep in because we have a big drying mat in there. And every time I stepped into that room, I was like, "Oh, this is such a heavenly sleep scent here."
Isn't it chocolatey? Was it chocolatey to you?
I didn't think that, but sweet, no? Like for sure, sweet.
Yeah, I love it. It's, and I feel like ashwagandha, it sort of rebalances the fluctuations of the nervous system. That's kind of how I see it anyway, sort of like regulating the tendencies that we have to sort of have like great bursts of energy and then collapsing. And ashwagandha sort of provides this like steady baseline where you have more sustained energy overall. And I think one of the ways that it does that is by it deepens our sleep, which is just such a wonderful thing. Whenever I've taken ashwagandha regularly, I sleep so deeply and so well, and wake up feeling so rested. And I think that's maybe one of the ways that it helps with our energy levels so well, because we're actually getting the rest and nourishment that we need. Yeah, it's almost like it puts like we in society tend to have our like activity and rest like folders in the wrong pockets or something, because we rest when we're wired and we try and get stuff done when we're tired, and ashwagandha helps put everything back where it's supposed to be so that we can rest with all of ourselves and be active with all of ourselves.
Oh, that's beautiful. Very helpful metaphor there, and thank you. Yes.
You're welcome.
Yes, please.
Yeah. I think we all need it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think roots can be overlooked, literally. Or we see the leaves, we see the flowers. Those are just what we literally evolved to capture our attention.
Hmm.
And to get into the roots, it takes another step. As far as, of course, if you're harvesting yourself, it's harder work. It's a very
Hmm.
different process, and then it's going to take longer usually to process that into medicine as well. But even if you're not growing or making your own medicine, just having the energetic eye to look at the roots and to come into relationship with them and see how getting more rooted in your life can change things
Yes.
into the darkness,
Yes.
into the soil.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Um, okay, Rebecca, you have a lot of things. You have a lot of offerings. Yeah, so I was going to ask which temperament do you most associate yourself with?
Um, I I mostly choleric and phlegmatic. Um, and it's funny because like we want to be choleric in work and phlegmatic when it comes to interpersonal connections. Like these, I think, in terms of how it would be nice if these temperaments manifested in the world, like it if we all worked in a choleric fashion, that would be great. But I'm very phlegmatic when I work, and I'm very choleric when it comes to other people. Like I'm the friend who's like, oh well, sorry that happened, but you know what you need to do, um, which I hear is very annoying. And when it comes to work, I'm like, oh, what do I feel like doing next? And I've tried to switch them around, and it's very stressful. So but yeah, mostly choleric phlegmatic, which is, very kind of feeling oriented and need to do things at my own pace in my own way, but then also like really focused. And it turns out I actually like I don't see myself as getting very much done. Um, but it turns out that I actually do, according
Uh-huh.
according to other people. When I'm like, oh my god, I'm so slow, and people are like, are you what?
Yeah, because that's what I was
Uh,
gonna say. Was it sanguine was the first one, the air
yes,
element? That I picture you like flitting from here to there, creating
I have a lot of
constantly.
sanguine. I have a lot of sanguine as well.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like every new Facebook post, which you're one of the best Facebook posters out
Oh,
there.
thank you.
Yeah, it's just like every post I'm going to read thoroughly because it's going to be smart, funny, entertaining, well written, helpful, funny.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, but you produce a lot, Rebecca. Your writings, your medicines, your projects, your teaching, it's really a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
I'm starting to realize this. Like after I have started to kind of tell the voice in my brain that's like you're not doing enough. I've started to tell it to shut up, which
Mm-hmm.
is really really handy. Like I highly recommend that to everyone. Is just like be like, you know what? I am enough and I am doing enough. Thanks for your input, brain, but like go away. Um, it's a really nice feeling.
Yeah. And it's also nice for me to hear though that it kind of sounds like you experience it in a more phlegmatic way. Like you're not stressed and frazzled at the end of creating something new.
No, I used to be. I used to be, and it's in learning to shut that voice up. Um, I've learned to really just trust kind of my feelings to take me where they go, basically. And it's interesting. I think I've actually become, in some ways, I hate to use this as a marker for success, and but I've become more productive
Mm-hmm.
and since just starting to do things in my own time in my own way. But I'm sort of loath to couch it in those terms because I think it's once again like a marker of a choleric society to be like, well, this is only beneficial because I'm more productive. Like I also feel better in my bones. Like I feel much more like myself, and I'm so much more content existing in the world in this way, which is another way of looking at it. But a side effect is that I'm more productive.
Well, I am inspired to try to get there myself.
I hope you can. It feels really wonderful.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask Shatavari and ashwaganda to help me.
Yeah, you should do the challenge. Do like the 14-day shatavari and ashwagandha infusion challenge.
Yes. So tell us about your many projects. How can people sign up for your newsletter, the wonder
Oh,
sessions, your
okay.
medicines, everything?
This is where I'm about to be embarrassed because I just said that I don't get enough time. Um, so I have an online shop where I make and sell products, and that is called Kings Road Apothecary. And on there is a little tab called that says Weekly Missive, and that is where you can sign up for my newsletter. And it is called the KRA Weekly Newsletter of Herbal Brilliance or something like that. I don't have humility issues. um, let's see. So that is one of the things that I do. The other thing that I do that I started this year is a course called the Wonder Sessions. And this was sort of, it's something that I wanted to start doing about 4 years ago. It was one day when I was sitting under a tree and once again, this is like me getting a bit out there, but like the tree told me, it was like, you have to teach them the old ways. And I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about, man. Like, I'm not, as far as I feel like I'm like a lot of people here in the US where I'm sort of culturally cut off from whatever old ways there are. Um, and so I didn't really know what they were talking about, but I spend so much time out here kind of communicating with the trees and the rocks and the spirits in the land and the plants that I'm working with. And the message just got stronger and stronger and stronger. And so one day I was like, okay, I mean, I have no idea what it is that you're asking me to teach, but I'm going to trust you and I'm going to do this. And so I started this course, and it's called the Wonder Sessions. And I am so infinitely grateful to the people who signed up for my first year because I was like, "This, you're my beta group for this course, where I'm going to teach you how to connect to all of these things." Um, and I had an outline in my head of what I was doing. Um, but it was sort of a leap of faith for all of us. And it has just been one of the more beautiful and humbling and incredible experiences of my life. And so that's the course that I'm teaching. And it's mostly like we have online groups where we talk and like a weekly chat where we sort of discuss the stuff. But the bulk of it is a series of books that I've been writing that come in the mail, and I wanted it to look like a delivery from Hogwarts. So it's like brown paper package wrapped in string with a wax seal, and it has the book and writings on plants and exercises and recipes, and then the book is basically a course leading people into learning how they can perceive the hidden world and connect more deeply with it. And it's sort of like a course in self-healing at the same time, because we're sort of healing the wounds inflicted on us in a way by this society that make us unable to see these things and unable to trust ourselves. So it's really it's quite intense, and it's been sort of life-changing for all of us.
Sounds like a remembering.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. Thank you.
Yeah.
I might put that on the website. So that's the other thing I do. And then recently, I just last week signed a lease on a shop space up here in Idlewild. So I'm moving my workshop up here into the mountains, and I'm going to have a little retail store.
Oh, wow.
I know, I'm so excited. And that is going to be called Wonder Botanica. And it is like this little grim style cottage up here, nestled in the mountains in Idlewild, California. And much like with the Wonder Sessions, I don't fully know what it's going to look like, but it's one of those things that life sort of handed to me in the same way. And so I'm like, okay, I'm doing what you tell me, even though I have no idea what I'm doing. So this is here.
Oh, it's amazing.
And next time you come to the desert, you should come up and visit.
Yeah, I'd love to. We want to go back to Palm Springs at some point. We had a lot of fun there.
Oh, good. Yes.
So thank you, Rebecca. Really nice to have a deep drop in with you, and I just really look forward to releasing this conversation. I think people are gonna really love what you have to say and benefit from your hard-earned life wisdom.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure and a joy to talk to you and to get to know you better.
Thank you for taking these medicine stories in. I hope they inspire you to keep walking the mythic path of your own unfolding self. I love sharing information and will always put any relevant links in the show notes. You can find my blog, handmade herbal medicines, past podcast episodes, and a lot more at mythicmedicine.love. While you're there, I invite you to click the purple banner across the top of the page to take my quiz, Which Healing Herb is Your Plant Familiar? It's a fun and lighthearted quiz, but the results are really in-depth and designed to bring you into closer alignment with the medicine that you're in need of. If you love the show, please consider supporting my work at patreon.com/medicine stories. There's some killer rewards there, exclusive content, access to online courses, free, beautiful, downloadable ebooks, coupon codes, giveaways, and just amazing gifts provided by past guests of the podcast. All of that stuff is at the $2 a month level. For a little more, you can access my herbal ebook or my small online course. And that's all there as a thank you, a huge thank you from me and from my guests for listening, for supporting this work. I love figuring out what I can give to people on Patreon. It's so fun. And I love that Patreon makes it that you can contribute for such a small amount a month. I'm a crazy, busy, and overwhelmed mom, and adding this project into my life has been a questionable move for sure, but I love doing it, and I love the feedback that I get from you all, and I just pray that the Patreon continues to allow me the financial wiggle room to keep on doing it while giving back to everyone who's listening. If you're unable to do that, or if you'd like to support further, I would love it if you would subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you would review the podcast on iTunes too, really helps get it into other ears. And it means so much to me when I read those reviews. It's like the highlight of my week when I check them and see new ones. And people are amazing. You guys are wonderful. Thank you so much. The music that opens and closes the show is by Marie Sioux, Marieesioux. It's from her song Wild Eyes, which is one of my favorite songs of all time. Thank you so much, and I look forward to next time.